Hey guys, this is Cody back once again for another video, and in this video I'm going to be showing off all of my music and rock and roll books and biographies that I have in my collection. Now, I don't have a lot of music books in my collection, but the ones that I do have are mostly about bands and, rock musicians that I look up to and ones that, really interest me. Now, first I'll talk a little bit. Now, when I get into a band, if it's a rock and roll band that I grew up listening to, or if it's, just somebody, that interests me, I like to learn everything that I can about that particular person or about that particular band, because most of their lives just fascinate me. And I just love hearing the story of how they went from, where they started off in their lives to, how they became, rock and roll stars, or how they how they got started, in rock and roll or in music in general. And then I like hearing about their entire career, if it's still going on today, if something happened and, like let's say if they died or if they committed suicide. I like to hear about that. I also like to get into, I'm one of those people that really enjoys getting into the mind of people that fascinate me. And a lot of these musicians I'm going to talk about really do fascinate me, and their lives are really both entertaining, and I just really enjoy hearing about, what they felt about, fame and, about just themselves in general and about life and everything like that. So I've built up a pretty good collection of biographies. I only have the ones that you see right here, and then I also have two books right there, which I'll show off, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, I don't have a huge collection, but I do plan on getting more as they come along, and I can find them for good prices. The first book I want to talk about is he's probably one of my favorite rock and roll guitar players, and that is Slash. This is his autobiography that he wrote with Anthony Bozza, and this is just a really great biography for anybody who's a fan of Slash and Guns N' Roses, which, as you guys know by this point, Guns N' Roses is my favorite band. So pretty much any book that I can get my hands on that talks about Guns N' Roses, talks about the career, and their story, I have to read. And this is without a doubt the best book that I've read so far. I've only read two books on Guns N' Roses, but this is probably the better one of the two. Slash, like I said, one of the greatest guitar players in rock, and he just has this feeling in his writing. The way that he says things, and he doesn't sugarcoat anything. He gets right into it, about everything about, from growing up to, about sex, about, what it was like to do drugs for the first time. It's just a really awesome biography. It's got some good pictures in it too. I'm not going to open the book up and, show the pictures off right now, but really awesome book. And I highly recommend anybody who's a fan of Slash check that book out. Alright. Going to leave that there. The next book is not a biography. It's a collection of poetry. But it is The Lost Writings of Jim Morrison, Wilderness, Volume 1. I hope you guys can see that well. Jim Morrison is somebody that's always really fascinated me. Just the way that he was, the way he acted. I was really glad I found this book. I actually found this book in the garbage can next to my mom's apartment. I just found it laying there, and I was like, oh, that's awesome, a Jim Morrison book. So when I got that, I knew I just had to pick it up. And Jim Morrison is a very talented and intelligent person, and a lot of these writings that he did are very, very good. His poems they're really good, and it really shows how intelligent and how stylish he was in his writing. So this is a really great book. So if anybody, I definitely recommend picking this up. I also have his biography, which I'll get to in a second. But Jim Morrison is somebody that's always fascinated me, like I said. Mostly of how positive he was over everything. And you can really hear that both in his writing. You can hear, positive and negatives, but this is really a great book. I do hope to pick up volume 2 of this sometime. Now the rest of these books are just rock and roll biographies. The first one I'll show off, which I have not read yet, but it is When Giants Walk the Earth, the biography of Led Zeppelin by Mike Wall. Now, I have not read any books on Mike Wall, but he's written so many different books about Led Zeppelin, Guns N' Roses, pretty much anybody, and this was the first book I ever picked up on him. I'm really excited to read this because, like I said, Led Zeppelin is one of the greatest rock and roll bands in history. They're probably the second biggest rock and roll band next to the Rolling Stones. Their influence on, the way that rock and roll music is now, it's undeniable, and I don't think it's ever been beaten by anybody. And they set the standard for what rock and roll bands are. I know some people say the Rolling Stones, but the way that they looked, the way that they played their instruments, the way that they wrote music, I think that is the biggest influence on rock and roll today. And I truly think that Led Zeppelin is probably the most influential hard rock band in ever. And they've influenced not only hard rock bands but also heavy metal. Some people will call Led Zeppelin a heavy metal band. I don't consider them that. I consider them a hard rock band, but they influenced pretty much every heavy metal and hard rock band that came after. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Like I said, I've never read a Mike Wall book. I've also never read a book about Led Zeppelin, but if you've heard about the books written about Led Zeppelin, you'll realize that every single book that has been written about Led Zeppelin has been criticized by the band somehow. But I will say that out of all the books that are criticized, this is the one that was least criticized, and it's considered I've read it's considered the best Led Zeppelin biography. I know that you can agree or disagree on that, but in my opinion, I've not read it yet, so from what I've read about reviews and things like that, it's considered the best. Just the way that it's written, some people don't like the way it's written, but either way, I do hope to really jump into this soon. So yeah, Led Zeppelin, When Giants Walk the Earth, really excited to read that. Now the next book that I'm reading, the next book that I'm showing off, was one that when I first got it, I was extremely excited to get. And at one point I wasn't disappointed, but another point I kind of was. But it is Watch You Bleed, the Saga of Guns N' Roses by Stephen Davis. Watch it fall down. But I already showed this book off in my Guns N' Roses collection, and this was the first book I ever read about Guns N' Roses and about their story. So when I first got this, I was so excited to get it until I began to read it. For those of you who don't know about Stephen Davis, he has been criticized about every book that he's written, pretty much. He's considered one of the worst rock and roll biographers that I've heard of, and I actually kind of agree with that. Simply because in the first chapter, when he starts talking about Axl Rose's birth, he actually gets the birth date of Axl Rose wrong. I forget what date he says it, but that's just got to be a red flag. If you're writing a book about a band and you get the date of the lead singer's, birth wrong, then you're pretty much, you pretty much can't really be writing the book, and you're really not a fan. I did learn a lot of good stuff in this book, but it's not the best bio. I do hope to get better books on Guns N' Roses because, like I said, they're my favorite band, and I want to learn everything I can about them, but this one is definitely not the best. Alright, I'm just going to lay that down. The next book I'm going to talk about is, as I said, I really enjoyed, big fan of Jim Morrison, so I picked up No One Here Gets Out Alive, the biography of Jim Morrison. And I've only read the first couple of pages on this, and I must say it is, the book has been accused a lot of sort of being hero worship, and I can kind of hear that. In the first couple of pages, it does sound like that the authors are like worshiping Jim and putting him on a certain pedestal, but I haven't read the whole book, so I'm not gonna, give my thoughts on it just yet. But I will say that, as from what I've read, it's actually a really good, well-written book. And like I said, Jim Morrison is one of those people that fascinate me. And yeah, so I'm really excited to be delving into this book soon. And then once I'm done reading it, I'll give my own thoughts on it. So that's it. Alright, now the last book I'm going to talk about, the book is about somebody that I really relate a lot to. He's one of my favorite musicians from one of my favorite bands. When I first heard the band, I didn't really know what to exactly call the type of music they were playing. It wasn't hard rock, it wasn't heavy metal, but it had sort of a mixture of both. And as I've learned more about this person, I realized that I relate so much to this person, and and I'm very and I say he fascinates me. The book is Heavier Than Heaven, a biography of Kurt Cobain by Charles R. Cross. Now I know that this book has been criticized a lot, but I will go ahead and say, when I was younger and I was in school, I always felt different from everybody else. I always felt like I didn't really belong there, and a lot of people thought I was weird, mostly because all I talked about when I was younger was movies and music. Those were the only two things I talked about. And I always felt very alienated when I was younger, and then it got worse. As I went to middle school, I just felt so sad, and I felt really depressed that, I felt like everybody was against me, and people, of course, they'd make fun of me, call me names or whatever, and it got better during high school, but it still sticks with me, and it still bothers me today. And that's why Kurt Cobain, relates a lot to me. I relate so much because when he was in high school, he was criticized. People, they said that he was, weird. They said he was, they just alienated. He felt very alienated in high school, and he felt like that he was completely different from everyone else. And it was, like I said, I can relate so much to Kurt Cobain. So when I decided to pick up a certain book, I wanted to read a book and learn more about him. And this was the book I chose. Now, I know that this book has been criticized by a lot of people, but for me, this is probably, I'm going to do a separate video where I give my own thoughts on this book, but for me, this is an amazing read. If anybody's a fan of Kurt Cobain or Nirvana, this is a definite read. It's probably the most detailed biography of Kurt Cobain out there, despite its flaws, and it was really emotional when I was reading this book. I really enjoyed it. There's nothing on the back, but I'll just go ahead and show it off. But yeah, Heavier Than Heaven, this is probably my favorite up until this point. As far as I've been reading, this is my favorite rock and roll biography right here. Heavier Than Heaven, a biography of Kurt Cobain. Really amazing book. Like I said, I'll get more into it. I do actually want to do a whole separate video where I just talk about Kurt Cobain. But until then, I'm just going to show this book off and leave you guys with that. But anyway, guys, that was just my collection of rock and roll biographies right there. And as you guys can see, I do have several other books that I'm going to be showing off later, so there will be a part 2. I'm going to go ahead and do part 2 and then put it up right after this one. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, guys, thanks to whoever watched this video. Thanks for subscribing to my channel. people that have. And let me know what you guys think about any of these books, if you've read them, your own thoughts on these books, these musicians, you know, and tell me what your favorite rock and roll biography is. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.